Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest episode of the Insurance COVID Cast. And today we'll be looking at the future of travel insurance in light of COVID-19. I'm delighted to say joining me for today's recording, I have Brian Brown, the Head of Insight at Defaqto, Matthew Ford, a partner and Head of Travel Practice Group at BLM, Peter Heyman, Director of PJ Heyman and Company, and finally, Anthony Kay, who's the Managing Director of Campbell Irvine and also Chairman of the Association of Travel Insurance Intermediaries. Welcome all.
Thank you. Morning.
Thank you.
So I suppose the first question I have to ask, with the advent of the pandemic lockdown, what did you see in terms of an escalation in claims, slowdown in sales, and how do you think the insurance industry has dealt with the situation? I'll come to you first of all, Anthony.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. Well, it's certainly been an emotional roller coaster ride in terms of the members within the Association of Travel Insurance Intermediaries. We've all seen circumstances which we never predicted. If I start with claims, there has been a significant escalation in the sheer volume and number of claims. General inquiries from members of the public, desperate to speak to anybody, irrespective of whether it's insurance, their holiday company. They just need some answers. I speak from my own personal perspective. When our contact centre, our phone system struggled to deal with the sheer volume of calls we received when the initial pandemic was announced and the Foreign Office closed its borders. There have been a number of insurance brands who I understand switched off the phone numbers just to ensure that claim inquiries came through by email, simply because it was impossible to service both at the same time. Service level agreements, we normally work to a approximately 5-day service level agreement to turn around claims. That has leapt to approximately 21 days. I must say the public have been very tolerant in these extraordinary circumstances, but it is a testament to the sheer uncertainty and number of inquiries that we've been receiving across the industry. Finding a number of the claims are not matters for the insurance policies, that they relate to flights and holidays that were cancelled by the operators and the airlines, who under various legislation have legal obligations to refund clients, but it's well publicised within the media that there are shortcomings within that structure. We are also doubling up and having inquiries for people who made claims, looking for answers, saying, why haven't you responded yet? Those who sent claims by post, of course, were met by the weekly collection of post from the office, as the office, like many, have been shut. How insurers have dealt with, they've been pragmatic at best, dealing and responding with the claims in accordance with the policy terms and conditions, and they've been poor at worst, with a lack of empathy, and specific examples relating to NHS key workers having to cancel due to emergency frontline duty, being scope of cover, obviously really rather running. Sales have continued to cease, for want of a better word. There is no policy sales, not until at least the Foreign Office amends its current restriction advising against British nationals travelling overseas. And the final concern that we've seen from the public is, how do they get hold of the traditional documentation required to substantiate a claim? When doctors' surgeries, normally it's a GP who confirms someone is not medically fit to travel, are closed. So the technical implications have been a frustration to all, but I think all in all, insurers have done a very good job to deal with something that is none of us were really with, and claims, when they are submitted, will be paid, and they can be. So I think that summarises our first-hand experience as an industry.
Peter, from your business view personally.
Thank you. Well, Anthony, I think, has covered off the claims position very well. I have to say that we've much the same experience as a tsunami of claims that really came in at the end of March through into April. Like Anthony's team, we are probably running around about 21 days behind, but people are quite comfortable with that. But on the sales side, it's quite interesting, because at the run up to this, before the lockdown, you could say that our industry went from feast to famine in the space of about 10 days. Our volumes were up by about 5-fold in the run up, and this is really people buying policies that don't typically buy them until a few days before departure. And of course, a lot of those turned into refunds some weeks later, and there was a disparity really between the insurers as to whether or not refunds were payable beyond the 14-day cooling off period, or there was a time on risk charge and so on. So it was a challenging time. We have no sales at all, and I have to say we're not expecting to be making any sales really until July, August, or even September. We've gone from our best case scenario to well east of worst case scenario, with all of the time and distance being put on the opportunity to travel.
Brian, or somebody sitting on the outside of this?
Yeah, we are outside on the claims front, so I can't comment on it. Although I think the industry is pretty clear what's happening. What surprised us early on was, as you said, there was a feast of sales in the run up for people who thought they might not get cover, and then it's come to famine. What surprised us was how many policies, when we dug into them, actually have wordings which could be used to exclude claims. So I would have imagined there's lots of insurers out there. 55% of policies we looked at before the lockdown have got some form of wording which might exclude claims if the FCO advises you not to travel. So I can imagine there's lots of rejected claims. I've certainly been dealing with an awful lot of press inquiries about what should customers do, where should they go. And I think to some extent the insurance industry has got off fairly lightly at the moment, because most of the focus has been on the airlines and the travel industry to get refunds, and how they haven't been giving refunds, rather than focusing on the insurers for not having paid out claims. Although I think that might come along a little bit later in the year. So in terms of the claims itself, I can't comment on it. Yeah. But as Peter says, I can't see the industry returning to sales until August, September. And even then, it'll be very depressed.
Matthew?
I think I agree with what everyone else says. I read that the ABI thinks that the loss for travel insurers is going to be in the region of about 275 million. But that doesn't take account of the additional staff resourcing that is going to be required. And I think that's also purely personal travel insurance. And there's also, of course, business travel that we have to take account of as well, which generally will fall under personal accident policies or other types of policy. So I think that those have also been hit as well. But I don't know what the numbers are on them, but I imagine that personal accident insurers are working very hard in exactly the same way that Anthony and Peter were just saying.
Can I just ask, Matthew, do you think there are any concerns, given the increased claims volumes, that people might try and submit less meritorious, even fraudulent claims? And how do you think this is possibly being managed at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, almost certainly is the unfortunate answer to that. We always see spurious and fraudulent claims increasing when there are periods of economic depression. Everyone will know that fairly recently the travel industry was hit with a huge explosion of fraudulent claims in the gastric illness space. And I think, you know, coming out of that, then it's possible that those parties that were propagating those kinds of claims may be looking for another avenue, and this may well be it. In terms of what we can do to fight it, then I think it's the same as any kind of fraud, really. It's a war on many fronts. The most important thing day one is to make sure that you have a claim by claim validation process in place. Make sure that you screen all of the claims, make sure that all of the data that comes in is washed, so that you can check if particular policyholders' names have cropped up in other places, making similar claims. And I think probably insurers will want to have fraud experts in the day one kind of investigation team, so that when a claim comes in, then you've got someone who knows what those red flags are, so that they can validate those claims before they then even go on to be considered under the policy. And then I think there's also one step beyond that, is the use of technology and analytics to look for trends. Geographically, where are these claims happening? Is there a particular age range? Is there a is there a link? I don't know, like a particular claims farmer, for example, might be associated with a number of policyholders. And then once you've identified that, the next step is to go on to work with other insurers, regulatory bodies, etc., to try and stamp out that fraud.
Anthony?
Jonathan, we've gone into technological solutions for high volume of retail holiday travel insurance claims, and that gives the insurers a huge amount of flexibility when it comes to fighting fraud, because the data is real, it's live, it can be assessed and scrutinized, which is a million miles away from the historic paper files, which would have to be processed and collated in due course. So I think the insurers are certainly aware of the spike, as Matthew said, whenever there is economic recessions, fraud does have a tendency to increase. We believe that we'll see an increase, but only of nominal value claims, but given the quantum of claims, there's a significant concern for insurers there. Insurers do have robust fraud indicators. They will be scrutinizing, but I believe, as Matthew said, you want to do it from day one and not wait until the horse is bolted, so to say. And I think the claims that we are seeing aren't claims that they fall outside the scope of cover. These are where airlines have cancelled flights and clients can't get refunds from their airlines, and they're pointing fingers at insurers saying, you missold me my policy, that sort of thing. But in terms of fraud, it is there, unfortunately. But I think as an industry, we're certainly wise to it. Proactive stances are being taken from day one.
Brian?
As I say, I'm outside that part of the industry, but I think we have this issue where, as Anthony says, customers are making claims that fall outside the scope of cover. And so the question is, to what extent will insurers, especially big brand insurers, want to hold to scope of cover? And then will customers be trying it on to try to force insurers through the media and the press to pay claims that really aren't valid in terms of the strict policy wording? So it's not strictly fraud, but it will be trying to push the insurers to the limit to see if they can try and push claims through when the insurers, if they follow the exact letter of the policies, wouldn't be paying those claims. We've seen that in the past where insurers have been fairly generous, as happened with Iceland, it happened with 9/11. Insurers were fairly generous in terms of dealing with claims, and we will see people who try and push it that way too.
Finally, Peter.
Yeah, I would agree with Brian, actually, that the insurers are adopting a pretty pragmatic approach. And in the past, say with Iceland, they certainly bent over backwards really to sort of pay claims that they could. I know we're coming on to that as a subsequent question. We certainly, in the run-up, in fact, before the lockdown, saw quite a lot of claims which were clearly attempts at disinclination to travel, but I suppose speaking to the doctor about an exacerbation of a chronic illness, and then you've got a £4,000 or £5,000 cancellation claim, and unless you can absolutely prove things, then insurers just have to take it on the nose and pay those claims. I don't think fraud is going to be endemic, actually, in what we are going to be seeing here. I agree with Anthony and Matthew about the checks and balances that need to be done. But fundamentally, I think one of the busiest places is going to be the FOS, who rather timely put their fee up by £100 to £650 on the 1st of April. Thank you, Foz.
So Peter, you mentioned it, Brian mentioned it. Do you think recent experiences such as the closure of airspace in the wake of September 11th, 2001 and the Icelandic volcanic eruptions in 2010 have prepared the travel sector for COVID-19?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the ABI estimated that the ash cloud cost the travel insurance industry about 85 million. And as was alluded to earlier, they're estimating something like 275 million for this event. I don't actually think it would be as high as that. I remember the ash cloud because, ironically, when it all happened, I was chairing a travel insurance conference, which was ironic, to say the least. But there was no doubt that at the time, the insurers did not actually put a common front up. What was it weather related? Was it an excluded event? It hasn't been quite so bad, I think, this time around. And certainly the lessons learnt last time was that wordings had to be explicit, not implicit. And the travel insurance industry is very good at responding to events. So post that event, we saw the introduction of airspace closure covers, journey disruption covers, which have kicked in this time around, picking up change of FCO advice and so on, where the costs are irrecoverable. So I think we will learn from this. And of course, one of the lessons will be the need to have appropriate exclusions so we don't pick up this sort of mass event, which travel insurance was never intended for.
Matthew?
Yeah, I agree entirely with Peter on that, and it is interesting that after the ash cloud, then there were a whole raft of queries with the ombudsman, and the ombudsman you've got to be very specific with your exclusions, and I think probably because not only have we had the ash cloud, we've also had SARS and MERS and other coronavirus respiratory diseases since then, which disrupted flights. So I'm sure that the travel industry has gone back to the policy wordings and made them as sharp as possible, so that they're not susceptible to challenge by the ombudsman or possible legal challenge, which we know didn't happen with the ash cloud.
Anthony?
As Peter identified, the travel insurance industry is quite sophisticated in responding to events by reviewing wordings on an annual basis to ensure that they're current. Everything we do is in the mindset of TCF. It's a very complicated financial instrument, a travel insurance policy, which is often a throwaway last-minute disposable purchase. One of the benefits of buying through the broker community is always going to be the information is often clearer than if it is purchased off a website. The consumers are savvy to policy small print, and with the introduction of product information disclosure documents, the wordings are robust, they are concise, but where there are ambiguities, we work hard to remove them. I think that certainly in the wake of 9/11 and tsunamis, we were geared up, but I don't think we were fully prepared to the scale of the operation. And it's all well having a disaster recovery plan, but I don't think ours ever involved not being able to go to our second office, and everybody in the entire industry working from home. But we've ticked that box now, we've done it, and credit to the teams. Our industry is still providing services to the customers, the clients, the policyholders, even when the offices are not fully staffed and manned. So yes, we are ever evolving.
Finally, Brian.
Yeah, I think Matthew was right that the industry wasn't prepared for this event. I mean, this is exceptional beyond exception. But we have had some examples in the past after the ice cloud, the volcanic ash cloud. We saw insurers bring in covers for specifically airline failure, for cancellation due to these sort of events. So I think we'll see that come in the future as well. We might well see some very brave insurers in 2 or 3 years' time come up with covers like this, but it won't be cheap. I think there is still an issue that, although Peter says, Anthony says that there are pretty robust wordings, we've seen lots of examples of wordings that are fairly loose, and I've seen quite a few wordings that I think make a good case to go to FOS, so I can see a lot of FOS claims, particularly in examples where you're not covered if you decide to go to the resort against the Foreign Office advice under the medical cover, and under the cancellation cover, you're not covered if you're not able to go because of Foreign Office advice. So either way, you're not covered, and the insurer gets to keep the premium. So I can see those cases going to the FOS, and there are quite a few cases like that where, and it's a situation that insurers probably never envisaged. And there are some wordings, I think, where insurers, we know something like 25% of all insurers have pulled from the market at the moment. They're just not selling any business at all. And from conversations we've had with them, a lot of those will be working on new policy wordings. So even though we have tightish wordings, they'll be looking very specifically to say, how do we stop this happening in future? The corollary of that, of course, is if the industry tries as much as possible to stop any claim like this in the future, and customers are fairly savvy, what will be the purpose of travel insurance? Customers will say, if the insurers deliberately design them to never pay out if anything really unpleasant happens, and this is a really unpleasant event. So
Brian, yeah, sorry.
So you will have this case of insurers trying to tighten the wordings, but there was a boundary between not willing to pay any claims or willing to just pay certain claims in real exceptional circumstances. And if I was a customer going forward, I would have concern about what's the point of travel insurance if the insurers are going to start making sure we exclude every event like this.
Because that brings me on to the next question, which is really, what do you think, Brian, will be the short to mid-term impact of COVID-19 on, sales, wordings, exclusion, and capacity? And do you think any groups, say elderly people, are more likely to be impacted than others?
Well, I certainly think in terms of the wordings, we'll see wordings get tightened, and we'll start to see certain groups of people who might find it a little bit harder. Not necessarily that they won't be able to get cover, it's just that the cover they get won't be cover they won't be looking for. They'll want cover for COVID-19, they want cover for unseen events like this, and that's not going to be around. The elderly might find that the premiums are so extensive that they simply just won't be able to afford cover or won't be willing to buy it. I think the bigger issue will be what is the customer willingness to travel, given that they won't be able to get this cover. We've seen from Bournemouth Beach this weekend, lots of people are willing to go to the seaside at the moment, and lots of those people will be willing to go abroad, but there'll be certain groups of customers who will not be willing to. So even when the Foreign Office says, right, you can go abroad again now, and when the airlines say, right, you can come on our planes, I think the market will be depressed in terms of numbers of customers willing to travel, given that if anything happens to them in resort, they won't be covered for medical treatment or return home. So I think the short to mid-term, it's going to be very tough.
Yeah. Anthony?
This almost follows on from the previous question, which is responses to the pandemic. A number of those insurers who are continuing to provide cover in the market are now doing so with coronavirus cover for medical emergency and repatriations. The jury is out. There are still some insurers with blanket coronavirus exclusions. Brian has identified that it will be probably a couple of years before we see full-blown cancellation cover due to another pandemic type event such as coronavirus. But I think credit to the industry to respond by including medical expenses and repatriation cover already. That cover is subject to the Foreign Office lifting its restriction. Nobody knows when that is. I have written to the Foreign Office as yet without response to try and ascertain how we can work with them, because we need ideally time to gear up to being able to sell again. What we don't want to do is to look on the internet, see on the Foreign Office website and suddenly have to respond as our contact centres are currently empty with furloughed staff. So that would be important. Capacity is an issue. In time, it will come back, but do insurers feel comfortable? Well, let's not forget that at the end of this year, we leave the EU and our European health insurance card is subject to review. These are also factors. If claims increase dramatically, premiums increase, it has an effect on people's perception. Do I think rates will increase? Absolutely. I think that is the inevitable of an industry that's paying out claims where valid. And we do continue to have an aging demographic of population who are plans, and quite rightly so. Will it affect the demographic? Only time will tell. We're not here to speculate, but there is a good, strong argument that says certain aspects of the industry of travel, such as cruise, may be more affected than others. In what way? We're not sure yet.
Peter?
Yes, Anthony's sort of covered off quite a few of my points. So we are already seeing underwriters looking to push through rate increases of around about 15 to 20%. And you referred to older travellers and people with medical conditions. in pure percentage terms, if you put 20% on the base rate, then by the time you load those premiums, those risk factors, then the premiums will go up relatively substantially. But I don't believe actually that they will be unaffordable. But those insurers that are going to pick up the COVID cover, it's going to be around for a long time, and handling those claims are going to be expensive. Getting people back. And you also have clearly the issue with the level of sterling against the dollar and euro. We collect premiums in sterling and we pay everything out pretty much in euros and dollars. I do slightly disagree with Brian about stating that what use is travel insurance if it doesn't cover COVID. COVID is only a small aspect. I know it is uppermost in everybody's mind at the moment. But travel insurance, 90% of travel insurance claims are made up of medical and cancellation. Nothing to do with COVID. And I suppose I do get frustrated, I know a lot of my colleagues do, that there's very little plaudits for insurers who are paying out hundreds of thousands of pounds on single claims. We always get beaten up over the relatively small number of declined claims. As to the future, I have to say I either agree with Anthony that it's going to take several years for our marketplace to settle down, and there will be some casualties. Hopefully none of those around the table now.
Finally, I'll come to you, Matthew.
Yeah, I agree with Peter's points, really. I think there probably will be a smaller number of insurers who want to be in the market, but I think those that do, they will have to find a way of keeping travel insurance relevant to the majority of people, while still at the same time protecting themselves from coronavirus-related claims. So there might be things like excluding specific countries, even if the FCO says it's okay to travel to them. There might be conditions around, wearing masks or gloves or those kinds of things for travel. This is maybe something Anthony and Peter can comment on, but I've read about in America they have this cancel for any reason travel insurance, which doesn't seem to be so popular here, but it's popular there, which is much more expensive than a standard travel insurance policy, but it only pays out a percentage of the claim, say 50 to 75%. And that seems to have been very popular in the run up to lockdown in America. And I wonder whether that kind of policy, which is much more expensive on premium, but gives more peace of mind to consumers, might be the way things go. I don't know if Peter or Anthony have a view on that.
I could certainly answer that if I may. I'm familiar with the American system, but I have to say travel insurance, we speak the same language, but they do things differently over there. The Americans are mostly fixated about cancellation cover. Their medical insurance, part of the travel insurance policy, will typically only cover something like $100,000. There are limitations as to when you can buy that cover, and it's actually also available with some carriers in Spain. You have to buy it within 30 days of booking your trip. And I have to say the buying pattern in the UK is somewhat different, as I referred to earlier. It would be a very costly form of insurance, and I'm not sure that actually 80% of people out there are really going to be wanting to pay the sort of price that would be driven by an any cause disinclination to travel, you name it, any cause type of policy. I don't think we'll get there.
Okay.
If I may just add, the fundamental difference is in America, they don't have the package travel regulations. Here in the United Kingdom, if your trip is cancelled or your airline cancels your flight, it falls upon the carrier or the holiday company to refund. In the States, they don't have such protection, hence the more prolific retailing of the cancellation for any reason insurances.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank my panel of Brian, Matthew, Anthony and Peter. Just as a footnote, I saw yesterday that the Spanish government announced that we're no longer going to be quarantined for 2 weeks if we go out there. I booked accommodation to go somewhere in Spain, and I checked the flights yesterday, and they were a third of the price they were in February. But I haven't bitten yet. I'm still waiting for the green light from the UK. But I'll say I'm still probably about 30 to 40% kind of optimistic that my holiday will go ahead. So there you go. But anyway, thank you again to my panel. Thank you all for watching. Remember, if you want to subscribe to Post or Insurance Agent, please use the button in the tab above. Until the next episode of Insurance COVID Cast, goodbye and stay safe, everybody. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.